I was standing beside the dining table in our Denver townhouse with a distributor contract open between two coffee mugs, waiting for Garrett Wexler to tell me why he had been late. He came in already wearing his wool coat, one hand wrapped around the handle of a black suitcase, his wedding ring missing before his mouth ever formed the first lie. I looked at the empty place on his finger, then at the folder under his arm, and something inside me went still before he said, "I'm not staying tonight. Brielle. I'm moving in with Maris." He did not whisper her name like a man confessing shame. He placed it in the room like a key he had already used. For 3 seconds, I thought the affair was the whole wound. Then Garrett tilted his head, almost kind, and said, "She understands what this brand can become. You can keep the kitchen, the labels, the late nights. I'm taking the part that actually scales." My hand stayed on the contract, but my eyes moved to the tablet he had left glowing near the salt bowl. A file export notification sat frozen on the screen, still trying to sync, and the file name was not vague enough to save him. Buyer list. Wholesale pricing. Maple pepper master formula. Tasting notes. I asked him what he sent her, and my voice sounded so calm it made his smile sharpen. "Enough," Garrett breathed. Like that word should have ended me. Enough for Maris to stop begging your company for scraps, and enough for me to finally build something with someone who sees me. He had rehearsed that sentence. I could hear it in the polish, in the way he made theft sound like liberation, and made my work sound like a locked pantry he had every right to open. He wanted me to cry because tears would make him feel chosen instead of caught. But I did not move toward him. I looked at the suitcase, the missing ring, the tablet still glowing with his mistake, and understood he had not come home to leave me. He had come home to watch me learn he believed he had already won. When the front door closed behind him, the house did not feel empty. It felt documented. I did not chase Garrett down the stairs because the tablet on my dining table mattered more than his car leaving. My hands stayed steady when I took the screenshot, catching the frozen export window before the system refreshed. I did not open the file, rename it, or touch one setting he could call altered. The townhouse smelled like cologne and coffee, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a place where records had to be preserved before grief touched anything. I laid the tablet beside the unsigned distributor contract and photographed both together, because Garrett had not only left me for Maris Ellery, he had left with the buyer list, pricing, tasting notes, and the maple pepper master formula he had no right to carry. The evidence was not dramatic, but it was clean. And clean mattered more than loud. I opened my laptop and checked the company access log without altering anything. Garrett Wexler had entered the formula folder at 8:47, exported the buyer list at 9:13, and opened the pricing sheet before coming home with that suitcase. That was not heartbreak making guesses. That was the system showing me he had planned the exit before he performed the speech. I called Taryn Locke from the kitchen, keeping my voice low because panic would only give him room to twist the story later. "Do not delete anything. Do not clean anything. And do not ask the team questions yet. Preserve the logs exactly as they are." Taryn paused once, then answered, "I'll freeze the reports and keep the system untouched." She did not ask if Garrett had done something, because the request already carried the answer. Only after that did I suspend Garrett's access under the handbook and confidentiality agreement he had signed. I locked his export privileges, paused his email, removed his recipe archive access, and blocked his ability to speak for the company. He had named Maris. That made policy clean. The access log made the last few years rearrange themselves. Garrett had always known how to stand beside me at tastings and make the room believe he had built the flavor before I touched a pot. He remembered hotel managers' names, laughed at the right jokes, and lifted a spoon of maple pepper sauce like he had stayed up testing it. I used to call that partnership because it was easier than admitting he was learning how to wear my work in public. He used to tell me buyers did not want the woman in the kitchen explaining shelf stability. They wanted the man who could make the brand feel effortless, the one who could turn a sample tray into a story. Let me handle the room. Brielle. You make the product. I'll make them want it. Back then, it sounded practical enough to forgive. Now, with his export times glowing on my screen, it sounded like training. Maris Ellery had entered our marriage through email before she ever entered my house by name. Her first message about a private label breakfast line had been polished and careful, but she copied Garrett first and wrote as if his instincts were the reason our brand moved. She praised his read on the market, his hospitality sense, his ability to see what customers wanted before they said it. My name appeared only where the formula had to be requested. That was the part that kept my hands cold. Maris was not some woman who stumbled into a lie without seeing its shape. She was smart enough to know a buyer list did not grow out of charm, and tasting notes did not come from dinner conversation. Garrett had fed her the version he needed her to believe, that I was the keeper of locked doors and he was the talent outside them. I looked back at the tablet and saw the marriage without the soft lighting. Garrett had not just fallen for Maris. He had found someone willing to applaud the story he had been trying to sell me for years. Together, they were not escaping me. They were walking out, carrying the life I had built and calling it their beginning. By morning, Garrett's silence had run out before mine did. He posted before breakfast, first on LinkedIn, then on Instagram, using the same clean headshot he used for buyer meetings and the same soft language he used when he wanted strangers to trust him. He wrote about leaving a limiting environment, stepping into a new chapter, and finally building with a partner who understood vision instead of fear. He never typed my name, but in Denver's food world, he did not have to. I read the post once while standing beside the laptop where his access log was still open. Every sentence tried to make him look brave without explaining why a brave man had exported files before leaving his wife. He wrote that the new product line would move faster than people expected, because this time, no one would slow innovation with control. That line sat directly beside the timestamps on my screen. And for the first time all morning, I almost laughed. Then Maris Ellery commented beneath it, and the room went colder in a quieter way. Sometimes the right person only needs the right table to finally serve what they were meant to create. It was polished, harmless to anyone who did not know the files Garrett had tried to carry out of my company. But I knew exactly what sat underneath those words. And so did the tablet, the export window, and the buyer list he had touched before he came home. Damon Kincaid called before I could decide whether anger wanted my hands. I told him Garrett had posted and Maris had commented. And Damon did not sound surprised when he told me not to answer either of them. Save everything, Brielle. People who need to look like winners usually write the timeline for us. I took screenshots of the post, the comment, the timestamps, the likes, and the first names from our industry beginning to gather underneath it. Garrett thought public sympathy would soften the ground before I could stand on it. He wanted the room to see him as a man walking toward love and progress, not a husband carrying stolen work into another woman's opportunity. But the post gave his exit a date. Maris gave it approval, and his own words connected their new beginning to the files still glowing in my records. He had not controlled the story. He had published the first page of mine. Damon Kincaid's office sat above a quiet block near the courthouse, small enough that nobody walked in to perform power. I brought the tablet. Screenshots. Access log. Handbook. Confidentiality agreement. And distributor contract Garrett never signed. Damon read the post first. Then the export times. Then the file names. And his face did not change. That steadiness mattered because every page on his desk proved this was not just a husband leaving. He looked up only after the timeline had settled. The affair hurts, Brielle, but it is not the legal center of this. I nodded. because the tablet had said the same thing in a colder language. Garrett, leaving me for Maris Ellery, could make people whisper. But Garrett moving formulas, buyer information, pricing, and tasting notes toward her company made the business breathe differently. Damon placed the confidentiality agreement beside the access log and tapped pages once. A judge will not punish him just because he wanted out of the marriage. But if he used company access to move protected business information to someone who could profit from it, that is separate. Nothing in that room needed to sound dramatic, because the timestamps were already louder than anything I could say. The formulas were not valuable because I loved them. They were valuable because they were kept behind limited access, tested over years, tied to buyer relationships, and never handed out publicly. The buyer list was not a contact sheet Garrett could carry, like a souvenir from dinner meetings. It was a map of trust my company had earned one sample jar at a time. Damon told me not to call clients, not to warn them, and not to let pain turn into something Garrett could frame as panic. Then Taryn Locke sent the night reports while I was still sitting there. Garrett had requested an export days earlier under the excuse of preparing a proposal for a hotel account that never received one. The lie was small, but it sat exactly where the timeline needed it. I asked whether Garrett could claim it was personal knowledge from years inside the company. Damon slid the metadata printout closer and answered, "Personal knowledge does not come with file paths, export records, and internal pricing sheets. So we separated the mess into clean pieces. The marriage would be handled as a marriage, but the files Garrett carried toward Maris were business property. He had no right to move." I did not see Maris Ellery walk into Whit Calder's office that morning, but Damon later showed me the notes her company preserved after our letter arrived. She had gone in expecting a product meeting, the kind where people praise speed and call it instinct. Whit had the legal notice on one side of his desk and a sample board on the other, with her breakfast line arranged like it still belonged to the future. He did not start angry, which probably made it worse. He pointed to the tasting notes first, then to the comparison sheet his team had prepared. "Garrett gave you this with what authority?" Maris answered too quickly, saying it was his market knowledge, his years with buyers, his understanding of what restaurants wanted before anyone else could name it. That might have worked if the file had been clean. Whit slid the metadata toward her and waited. The silence after that question told me more than any confession would have. A woman who truly thought she held original work would have asked why my company name was attached to it. Maris did not ask that. She asked whether the rollout had to stop immediately, and that choice showed exactly where her fear stood. Garrett texted her while she was still in the room, because pressure always made him test loyalty. Damon's copy of the message was short enough to memorize. "Do not let Brielle scare you. She controls everything until someone refuses to fold." Maris read it with Whit across from her, and whatever future Garrett had sold her began looking less like a door and more like a box with his fingerprints on every side. She had not been handed a partnership. By the end of that meeting, Whit had stopped talking about launch dates. The product line was paused. The files were pulled into legal review, and Maris left with the calm people wear when they are trying not to understand too much at once. She was not cornered because she loved my husband. She was cornered because she saw the warning label and still tried to sell the jar. Mediation did not feel like a battlefield when Garrett walked in. It felt worse, because he arrived wearing the same gentle smile he used when buyers needed to believe a sample jar had a soul. His blazer was the one he wore to hotel tastings, and I remembered the company card receipt before I remembered the color. He sat across from me like the room still belonged to whoever could sound calmest. His lawyer opened with careful language about preserving dignity, avoiding public damage, and reaching a fair separation before emotions made business harder. Garrett leaned back when it was his turn, hands folded, voice soft enough to sound wounded. "I am not trying to hurt you, Brielle. I just want my share, temporary support, and a mutual silence agreement so neither of us destroys what we built." He said what we built without looking at the folder beside Damon Kincaid's hand. Damon did not argue with the marriage first. He placed the confidentiality agreement on the table, then the access log, then the metadata printout, then the screenshots of Garrett's post and Maris Ellery's comment. The order mattered because it kept Garrett from hiding inside romance before the business records entered the room. This is not about who he chose to love. Damon kept his voice even. This is about what he moved while he still had company access. Garrett's smile held for one more second before it began to work too hard. He said the formulas were part of his years inside the company, that buyer relationships came from dinners he handled, that tasting notes were shared knowledge from a marriage and a business. Damon slid the export record closer, and Garrett stopped before finishing the sentence. The file path had his login, the timestamp had his exit, and the post had his own words about building faster with someone new. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the performance losing air. I do not need you to come back, and I do not need an apology polished for lawyers. I need you to stop calling my work something you are allowed to carry into Maris's opportunity. The room went quiet after that, not because I had raised my voice, but because the evidence had finally made his version too small to stand in. His lawyer asked for a break, but Garrett barely moved when they stepped aside. He had walked in wanting support, silence, and a piece of the brand he had tried to walk out with. He left the table agreeing not to contact my buyers, not to use or share company data, and not to represent himself as having rights to my formulas or customer records. The divorce could continue as a divorce, but the story he wanted to tell had lost its cover. Garrett did not disappear in one dramatic fall. He faded the way people do when rooms they once charmed start comparing notes. Buyers who used to answer him before lunch stopped replying. Not because I called them crying, but because word travels fast in Denver's food world. A man carrying protected work toward someone else's launch becomes a risk before a scandal. Maris Ellery left her position after Whitcalder's company paused the breakfast line and sent the files into legal review. No one gave a speech about morals, and nobody needed to. The problem was not that she loved my husband, or even that she believed the version Garrett sold her. The problem was that she saw the warning label, touched the files anyway, and asked whether the rollout had to stop. Whit kept his job, but the promotion he expected moved to someone else's calendar. He had not stolen the files, but he liked the shortcut enough to stop asking where it came from. That was enough to change how his bosses looked at him. Sometimes a career does not end with firing, but with one quiet meeting where trust leaves first. Taryn Locke became my operations lead before the month was over. I did not give her the role because she had taken my side in a bad marriage. I gave it to her because when the room got ugly, she protected the logs, froze the reports, and kept the system clean. She earned authority the way Garrett only performed it, by doing the work when nobody was clapping. Damon Kincaid closed the business side with the calm he had carried from the beginning. Now let the divorce be a divorce, he told me, and for the first time, that sentence did not scare me. Garrett could keep calling himself punished for love, but the records made that costume too small. I signed what needed signing and walked out without looking for him. I moved into a brighter place near the edge of Denver, where mornings did not start with measuring Garrett's mood. Taryn texted that every order had shipped on time, and I read it with the kitchen window open. Nothing in my life had to make room for his hunger. If this story reminded you of someone who treated your work, care, or loyalty like something they could spend, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and remember that peace begins when you come home to yourself.